You're a business owner. You can't be on the phone all day.
Yes.
This is Lucy.
Which is why you need Ruby, live receptionists who can take your calls when you need an extra hand.
I'd be happy to assist you.
So when this happens,
Good afternoon. How may I help you today?
you can keep doing what you do best. Ruby.
Welcome to RoofTalk, a production of the National Roofing Contractors Association. This podcast is hosted by Told You So Media, and I am your host, Crystal Ribble. These episodes will inform you on the current trends and happenings within our industry. And today I am joined by NRCA's legal experts to help us make sense and demystify some of what is happening with everything from E-Verify to I-9 audits and even threats of ICE visits. We want you to know how you can best prepare your teams to stay on the right side of the law. So welcome Trent Cotney, NRCA's counsel and partner and practice group leader with Adams and Reese, and then also Ben Briggs, partner with Adams and Reese as well. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so we, of course, are not giving you the easiest topic to talk about, but I'm appreciative that you're here and you're willing to tackle this with me. The first question I have, all of this is going to matter so much to our contractors and our members. But the first thing I want to ask is, what are the most common legal issues roofing contractors face when hiring immigrant labor?
Well, I'm not sure if Trent wants to field that first or if I get the honor of kicking us off today.
I'll
Sure.
let you start, man. Go ahead.
Okay. So, the main thing to understand, right up front is that every employer in the U.S., regardless of industry, has to go through the I-9 process for every single one of their W-2 employees. Doesn't matter if it's John Smith, who's, the 10th grandson, off the Mayflower, or if it's, Jose Gonzalez, who's, brand new to the country. Every employer has to go through the I-9 process for every one of its employees. And failing to do so can result potentially in civil fines, as well as, depending on the circumstances, even some criminal implications. So when you're onboarding new employees, that's kind of you have to do that. And there's not kind of a non-negotiable when it comes to that. Some other elements, potentially you can work around, but the I-9 is kind of rock solid required for every single new employee.
Yeah. Okay. Trent, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Today, the environment that we're in, it's a little bit of a quagmire for roofing contractors, right? And the reason is because, our labor as a whole, the threat to labor and the ability to obtain skilled labor has been the biggest issue that the industry has faced since I can think of it, right? When you combine that with very aggressive immigration enforcement, it puts employers in a difficult position, right? So to echo what Ben said, one of the best things that employers can do is be purposeful and consistent in everything that they do. And what I mean by that is, regardless of whether it's, applying HR policies or it's engaging in hiring or firing practices or whatever it is, if you are purposeful and consistent, if you treat everybody the same way, then you are mitigating risk, right? And part of that is understanding that when you're onboarding potential employees, you follow the I-9 process every time. You make sure that you're checking the boxes, you're, obtaining the right documentation, you're doing the kind of things that you need to do. But one of the things, I always joke around, nobody ever calls us with good news, right? One of the things that we always see on our end, one of the first things that we're kind of tasked with is to see what does the administrative backfill look like in your company, right? And if you're not doing the kind of things that you need to be doing, properly maintaining your I-9s, having a record retention policy, having the kind of HR policies that you would expect any, reputable employer to have, it makes it more difficult for us to defend, if ICE DHS start knocking on the door. So, I think that's an initial step, is just making sure that, you're engaging in standard operating procedures and are being consistent in that as you, look at and onboard new employees.
Sure. And a lot of what you just said can kind of answer my next question of how contractors ensure that their hiring process complies with immigration laws. there are processes in place, to make sure that they comply. Do you want to say anything else about that?
Ben, go ahead.
Well, the answer to that question depends a little bit depending on what type of work you're doing and where you're doing it. So, for example, if you're working on a federal project or a government project, there'll be an e-verification requirement on top of the I-9s. Certain states require you to do e-verify regardless of whether it's a private sector or a public sector job. But again, it kind of depends on what state you're working in, potentially even what county or city you're working in, and again, the nature of the project itself. Similar to that, some states require you to hold on and make copies of the documents that new hire presented to you, like their green card, their social security card, whereas other states don't require you to make copies of those documents. So again, it's, when it comes to figuring out how to have a compliant onboarding process when it comes to immigration law, it's important to understand where are we working, what kind of work are we doing, so that you can determine which laws apply. Because again, the I-9 applies across the board, but those other things like e-verify and making copies of green cards and things of that nature are going to depend on where you're working and again the nature of the work, whether it's a public sector project or a private sector project.
Yeah,
Sure.
part of it is understanding that the regulations governing onboarding of employees and naturalization and the I-9 process may vary. And if for example you've done nothing but residential roofing, right, and all of a sudden you move into commercial and then start doing federal work, you're going to be subject to e-verify. So there may be heightened requirements or other things like certified payroll that you've got to navigate, and that is where we see some contractors get into trouble, not just on the employee side, but also on the safety side, right? If by example, if you're expanding your operations from roofing to structural work, you're going to need additional PPE and training and guidance. And part of that is understanding that your risk mitigation model evolves as you evolve. So one of the things that, I've heard Ben say it a million times is that, take a look at your policies and procedures at least twice a year, just to make sure that the company is compliant and the laws and regulations for where you're doing work, that you've got policies and procedures that govern that. So there are some states that are heavily regulated. I guarantee while we're talking right now, California's probably enacted another law that's affecting contractors, right? And then there are other states that may not be. Right. And you have to be aware of both federal and state requirements and make sure that your HR manual and your policies cover that.
That is a good reminder that as a company grows or they add services, they add things that they do, then they have to look at all of this to make sure that there are other policies that they don't also have to adhere to. That is a good reminder. So for the individuals that need e-verify and that have to use that, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses there that they should know about?
So I'll start with that. I'll let Ben, get the more granular answer. So there's pros and cons to e-verify. Okay, the pro to e-verify is that there is a heightened chance that you have employed legal people that are here, that are capable of working here legally. Okay, it's not 100% chance, because we've had situations where the documentation that is submitted or the whatever it might be is falsified, and we've had false positives on e-verify. But heightened chance that you can feel safe that you're employing people that are here legally. The downside of that is you will also know if you are, if you have people that are not here legally. And one of the key things that we have to navigate as far as advice that we give contractors is, if you knowingly employ someone that is illegal, that's a potential criminal penalty. So e-verify can often provide that knowledge. So it's something that you have to navigate. But Ben, what else is important to kind of note there?
So with e-verify, it's kind of critical to understand when you begin participating in e-verify, because the way the law works, for example, if a company started participating in e-verify on January 1st, 2026, for the most part, they're not even allowed to e-verify their current employees who've already been employed. They can only use e-verify going forward for new hires. Now, the exception to that is if you are working under a government contract that requires you to send people out to the project who are e-verified. You can then at that point e-verify current employees to comply with that contract. But outside of that contractual scenario, by and large, once you participate in e-verify, you then are required to e-verify all new hires, but you are not allowed to e-verify current employees. So again, when you start, when we talk about e-verify compliance, it's important to kind of understand when do we begin participating, which employees are covered by our e-verify requirements, and which ones are actually protected from our e-verify based on when we began participating in the program.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a lot of things they need to make sure that they are aware of within the steps of that. Um, when we talked about I-9, going back just a little bit, because you said everyone needs to know this, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen contractors make whenever they're completing their I-9 forms?
One of them up front is making sure you're using the right form, because the Department of Homeland Security issues new I-9 forms every year or two. And if you're using an outdated form, that's an easy way for the government in an audit to ding you and fine you just for using the incorrect form. So, for example, DHS issued a new form in 2025 that is set to expire in 2027. So, unless they decide to create a new one in the meantime, you have one in place now that should work for the next couple of years. But again, you want to constantly be checking on the first page of the I-9, it'll say when it expires at the top right. Look at that date, make sure it hasn't expired when you're onboarding, a new employee. The other thing to keep in mind is there's a very small window of time to fill out the I-9 in what's considered a timely fashion. So the first section of the I-9 is the section the employee is supposed to fill out, where they give their name, their date of birth, they indicate their citizenship status, things of that nature, and then the employee signs and dates that section 1. Well, they're supposed to do that by the end of their first day of work for the company. Now, the section 2, which is the part the employer fills out, you have up to 3 business days to complete and sign that, and 3 business days after when the worker begins working. So if the employee begins working on a Friday, you have until the next Tuesday to fill out section 2 as the employer, but the employee has to do it by the end of that first day. So again, that's where those standard operating procedures Trent talked about are important, because you have to have an onboarding process that understands, hey, we need to get this completed by the end of the first day, section 1. We need to then have our team, whoever's our authorized representative, complete section 2 and sign it by the end of that 3rd business day. Because again, that's a really easy way to do everything right, but just do it a little bit late. And now the government is penalizing you. And for all these, technical violations of I-9, it's a per I-9 penalty. So if you're doing this across the board and you have 100 of these I-9s that are all the wrong version, or they're filled out correctly, but maybe the wrong date, or maybe you missed a box here or there, that can be hundreds or thousands of dollars per I-9. And so again, you want to just have the right standard operating procedure to get this done timely, to use the correct version, and to make sure that whenever, for example, when the employee hands it back to you, have someone check it to make sure the employee didn't miss something. If they did, hand it back to that employee, say, hey, you need to fix this. And when the employer fills out section 2, double check it to make sure, you didn't miss anything. Because again, missing something like that, if it's not corrected, can result in thousands of dollars of fines, even though even in a scenario where the employee is completely legitimate, they're allowed to work in this country, you can still get penalized for just these very technical violations. So again, you want to have a standard operating procedure in place to get it done correctly, and to kind of fly spec it to make sure you catch and correct any issues that might exist before the government audits you. Because once they begin their audit, you're not allowed to change anything. And as soon as you get that audit notice, whatever exists now is what exists, and they're going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to try to find anything they can penalize you for, because that's just more money in Uncle Sam's pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's some good points.
To piggyback off of what Ben said, having an I-9 checklist for whoever's responsible for, onboarding is important. I'd say the biggest ones that I see are failure to use the right form. The form changes often, and, just making sure that you've got the correct form. It's on the DHS website. Failure to get the employee signature, and then it's just the minutia. It's failure to cross a T or dot an I. And as Ben said, it is very detail oriented, right? So if you're not a detail-oriented person, you want to get it to somebody that is, right? Like, I know I'm not good at math. I got to count on my fingers. So I make sure I've got a CPA or somebody that can help me out. Same kind of thing. If you're an owner, operator, and detail is not your thing, make sure that you are getting it to someone that can follow that checklist consistently. That checklist is going to be important. The policies and procedures that govern all that is important for defense standpoint. So it's a good thing to show that you're engaged in, attempts to catch problems through regular audits and things of that nature, because, when you have to defend things, you can show, hey, we tried our best, right? Here's what we did. We missed this, my bad, but at least we've got a policy and procedure in place to catch these things.
Sure. Yeah, you have to be really, really intentional to make sure that you always have that right form. Like you said, having a detail-oriented person, and it's okay to admit if you are not that person. Find the person within your company that is and have them double check things. It's really, really important. So that's good to know.
Advo, what?
Advocacy. Oh my God. Advocacy in action. Advocacy in action.
Advocacy in action.
Advocacy.
Advocacy in action. Let's do that again. Yeah.
Advocacy in action. Advocacy in action.
Saying advocacy is hard. Taking action? Easy. Register for Roofing Day in DC 2026 and see for yourself.
Okay, so I feel like this is a very real and raw topic right now. It's something that is always something that we need to think about, but right now especially. So what should employers and employees know for them to handle a visit from ICE? What steps can they take to prepare in case this happens to them?
So as part of an NRCA member's benefits, they have, the opportunity to get legal counsel from us, advice up to 30 minutes a month. And I'll tell you, since January, by far, the biggest question that I get is how to deal with an ICE raid, right? And it is a very stressful situation. So, the person that's out there in the field, regardless of whether it's a superintendent, quality control person, or member of management, they need to have a script in place. I recommend a wallet card or something like that so that they know, here are the steps, call the office, get counsel involved, remember your rights, don't talk to them without counsel present, obtain a copy of the warrant. There's a handful of things that you need to be doing to protect yourself. And obviously, we'll get into more detail as we discuss things, but the key thing is to remain calm and professional. Don't obstruct. Don't put your hands on ICE. Don't tell your people to run. Don't do anything like that. Remain calm and professional, but know and assert your rights. That's the key thing. And I'm a firm believer that if you gameplay for crisis management situations, that you remove that stress, that fear, and you're going to respond better, right? You're going to respond truthfully. You're going to do everything that you're supposed to be doing, but it's going to help you mitigate risk because you're responding in a calm and calculated manner.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder. Like my kids, they have drills at school. They have fire drills and they have tornado drills. And even nowadays, what they call bad guy drills. Like they practice what happens if an emergency is coming. And I think that's really important for people to do inside their business as well. If you can practice this, it'll help you in case that ever shows up.
Yeah, you're creating that
Absolutely.
proverbial muscle memory.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. You'll know what to do. So are there any stories of any of the things that we've covered from clients that you can share of things that happened and how they had to kind of mitigate some of these situations, whether it's ICE or even I-9 and E-Verify things?
I had a client call me maybe 2 weeks ago, a roofer here in Florida, basically ICE showed up at their office and, wanted to talk to a bunch of people, wanted to look at a bunch of records. And thankfully, I had conversations with this contractor prior to this about the general topic. And the person who was at the front desk knew, hey, when this happens, I contact, this, officer of the company. And then that officer of the company contacts me and we could walk them through it. And what was important there, and in general to understand, is that whenever ICE comes to a private area, like your office or maybe a private job site or a private, even, home property, they don't have any right to enter private property unless the owner gives consent or they have a judicial warrant. And in this case, ICE was showing up without any warrant. So they had no right to enter that property, my client's office, and to conduct the interviews they wanted and to gather the documents they wanted. They had no right to do that unless my client consented. And and to be clear, if they walk into your office and your front desk person doesn't understand, hey, when this happens, I need to call somebody else or I need to get in touch with legal before I let ICE in. If that hadn't happened with this particular contractor prior to ICE visiting, somebody at the front desk is probably going to be intimidated by a federal agent flashing a badge, and they're going to consent to things that they don't have to consent to and that ICE has no right to do without a judicial warrant. And because of that happened like 2 weeks ago. ICE has never returned. I think they're going door to door, so to speak, to find, the easy targets, if you will, the low-hanging fruit. And so if they need to go to file something with a court and get a judge to grant a warrant, it's not worth their time. They're going to go down the street to the next roofer and hope that that roofer isn't as prepared and will just consent to them doing what they don't have any right to do absent consent. And so that's, that anecdote is, I could probably tell 20 stories of similar nature, where as long as the contractor understands their rights and politely and professionally enforces those rights, a lot of times ICE will just try to find an easier target, and you can save yourself having to go through that whole situation.
Right. And that kind of speaks to the practice we were talking about, like all the points of entry at your business, having something for every area that they could approach you, that you practice. What were you going to say, Trent?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you made a great statement there, and, signage is important. Whether something is fenced or gated off or cordoned off is important. Oftentimes we have to get into the minutia of what is public versus private property. There are certain things that are clearly public, like a sidewalk or a street, but if anyone can access your lobby, then that's probably public property, right? If you've got a door that connects to a warehouse in the back, if that door is locked or requires a key card or has a sign that says restricted access, all of that indicates to any observer that that's private property, which, there's an argument there that you would need a judicial warrant. The reason why that warrant requirement is important is that if for some reason they access that area, after you've objected, and what we always say is, object, don't ever prevent them from accessing, but object, say, look, always blame the lawyer, right? Nobody likes lawyers. It's pretty easy to blame the lawyer. Our lawyer has told us that you can't access private property without a judicial warrant. This is clearly a locked area that says restricted access. We believe this to be private property. And they go ahead and they access that area, and let's say they, grab individuals or do whatever they want, whatever it is. Regardless of whether it's the employer's attorney that might be representing an employer or the employee's attorneys, they may have grounds to suppress that evidence based on insufficiency of warrant, right? Or we've had other situations where the property address is off by a digit or two. That can form the basis for a motion to suppress. So always take a photo of the warrant or whatever it is, regardless of whether they're on an administrative warrant or judicial warrant. If they're there with some warrant, take a photo of it, because that's going to be very important for counsel to look at and to see if there's a basis to, preclude that evidence that may have been gathered during that investigation.
Yeah, those are really good reminders. You mentioned earlier that members of NRCA have access to your services so often so that they can ask questions like this and they can help themselves understand things. Can you just give some encouragement to that members of NRCA should contact you if they have questions about this?
Yeah. And, our team stands by to answer any issues that members may have, regardless of whether it's, immigration, OSHA, contracts, customer disputes, whatever it is. And there is a way to access it, online through the member portal. You can ask a legal question. it gets routed to us, and then we respond immediately. I usually respond same day that I receive it. Or you can contact us directly, just indicate you're an NRCA member. I would say I probably get 3/4 of them direct, and then a quarter through the portal, right? If it is something that I can address, then clearly I'm addressing it. But if it's something that we need a specialist in, let's say it's a real granular employment issue, I'll loop Ben in, or another employment lawyer, depending on what we're doing. So it's a great resource, and it's there for our members to help kind of navigate these kind of things when you just need somebody to ask a question. You don't necessarily need a deep dive or a brief written or anything like that. But if you want some good off the cuff advice, this is a great way to get it.
Yeah. So we want everyone to know that you have legal advocates at your disposal through NRCA. And so we are very thankful for that service. And we want to make sure that you use it so that you're not flying in the dark with all of these different things that happen within your company. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you guys want to say before we wrap this up?
Then I'll let you start.
I don't know that there's anything we didn't talk about, but I'll just reiterate, my big thing, and anyone who's spoken with me a couple of times has probably heard it, be proactive, not reactive. My grandpa used to always say, measure twice, cut once. The idea is, address these issues up front so that you're not trying to figure them out on the fly, or, let's try to prevent these fires, from the onset rather than trying to put them out in the back end. And what that means from a practical standpoint is, go through your policies, make sure you have, correct procedures in place, correct standard operating procedures in place, and make sure that your team understands what to do. They've been trained on it. They understand where this document is, where they can reference it, what checklists to use. The Trent referenced the kind of having a notice of rights card that they can have in each of their vehicles and can have, in the office. Just create the resources and kind of facilitate that training and that understanding, that education up front. So that way we can eliminate half the issues to begin with. And then if we do run into something, we know how to address it at that time because we've already prepared for it.
So what I would say is, immigration policy continues to evolve with this administration. I think this is a very important time for anyone listening to this podcast to speak up to your representative, your senator, whoever is representing you on the federal level, and let them know that we want legal workers, but we've got to have a better pathway to do that. We need a construction workforce visa that allows workers to come in here, work legally. We don't want criminals. They can be taxed, tracked, whatever, but we've got to have that method. And I encourage everybody, I was just looking up the dates, to go to Roofing Day in DC. NRCA hosted. It is April 15th and 16th of this year. Been pretty much every year I can think of. And it is a great way to get in touch with your representatives and senators. I guarantee this will be an issue. I'm optimistic that as our industry, agriculture and hospitality, suffer more through immigration issues, that the constituents will rise up and hopefully Congress will actually listen this time. So please make sure that your voice is heard, attend Roofing Day and speak up.
Yes, thank you for that reminder. Our last podcast was with our Washington, D.C. team, and they invited people to come to Roofing Day, use your voice. And even if you are afraid to do that or you're intimidated, there are people that can help you know what to do, what to say, who to meet with. So not only do you have that on the Washington, D.C. side, but you also have that here with Trent and Ben, able to help you through the legal things that you might be going through. So I'm so appreciative of you guys joining us for the podcast today. Thank you for your time and thank you for your expertise. Hope to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
This podcast is produced by Told You So Media.
Told you so!